He was untouchable, the terrifying architect of Seoul's underworld who had calculated every risk. She was the one variable he couldn't control, so he ghosted her to secure his throne. 3 years of silence, 3 years of building an empire until the doors of his engagement party swing open. She walks in holding 3 identical toddlers, and they have his eyes. His pregnant fiancée stands beside him, horrified. His past just declared war on his future. And the man who scares politicians is about to panic. This is the story of a mafia boss who sold his soul for power, and the woman who walked back into hell to save his children. Welcome to the reckoning. The ballroom of the 5-star hotel smelled of imported lilies and cold ambition. Kang Min-jun moved through the crowd like gravity itself, silent, inevitable, and terrifyingly composed. He didn't just own the room. He owned the debts of half the men toasting him. At 29, he had consolidated the syndicates into a fortress. The guests parted for him, offering bows that were too low and smiles that were too nervous. His fiancée, Lee Ji-woo, stood beside him in a fitted black dress that clung to the swell of her pregnancy, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. The diamond on her finger fractured the light from the chandeliers. She whispered something about the merger, about how their child would rule this city. Everything was calculated. Everything was safe. And then the double doors slid open. The air in the room seemed to vanish. She stood against the backdrop of the golden foyer, a splash of vivid color in a sea of monochrome suits. Her silhouette was impossible to mistake. The same proud chin, the same afro-kissed hair pulled back sleek, the same defiance in her posture. Min-jun's heart hammered, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Amara, 3 years dissolved in a heartbeat. He was back in that safe house, packing his bags while she slept. He remembered the note he didn't leave, the lie he told himself, that breaking her heart was the only way to stop a bullet from finding it. He had chosen the alliance. He had walked away from the only woman who saw the man beneath the monster, and he had never looked back. But now, she was 20 feet away, and she wasn't alone. She was pushing a black stroller. Inside, 3 little girls sat side by side, identical. They couldn't be more than 2 years old. Tiny top knots bobbed as they looked around the room with wide curiosity. Their babbling cut through the tense silence of the elite crowd like a gavel. Amara paused, adjusting the grip on the stroller handle. She looked tired but dangerous, like a lioness cornered. Then the girl on the left turned her head. Min-jun's blood turned to ice. My God, it was his face. It was the face he saw in the mirror every morning, softened, innocent, but undeniable. The same dark, intense eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw. The second girl looked up, clapping her hands. The third yawned, tilting her head exactly the way he did when he was thinking. Triplets. The ballroom blurred. The sound of champagne flutes clinking faded into a high-pitched ring. Ji-woo's voice, Min-jun, sounded like it was coming from underwater. The world collapsed into a single terrifying equation. He was a father. 3 times over, and he had left them unprotected. His hand slipped from his pocket. His champagne flute tilted, threatening to spill, but he didn't notice. His feet moved on autopilot, stepping away from the heiress and the empire, drawn forward by a force stronger than gravity. Who is that? Ji-woo gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the realization hit her too. He didn't answer. He couldn't. One of the triplets, the one in the middle, locked eyes with him. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She stared with an unnerving familiar intensity. Then she pointed a tiny finger at him and tugged on Amara's red sleeve. Mama, him. Amara froze. Slowly, terrified but resolved, she lifted her gaze. When her eyes met Min-jun's across the ballroom floor, the silence didn't just stretch, it shattered. She looked pale, exhausted, and furious. Min-jun opened his mouth to speak, to demand, to beg, he wasn't sure which, but the look in Amara's eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't the look of a woman who had come to ruin his wedding. It was the look of a woman who had run out of places to hide, to understand why the most feared man in Seoul was currently shaking, and why a woman from London had walked into a den of wolves with 3 toddlers. We have to go back. Back to the assassination attempt that started it all, and the 3 years of secrets that were about to burn this hotel to the ground. This is the moment everything changes. If you believe a father deserves a chance to fight for his own blood, press subscribe. Don't just scroll past and leave them to the wolves like everyone else in this ballroom. Prove you've got their back. Min-jun didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He simply raised a hand, a sharp, cutting motion that his security detail understood instantly. Clear the corridor, now. Before the whispers in the ballroom could crescendo into a roar, Min-jun stepped between the cameras and the stroller. He placed a hand on the small of Amara's back, the heat of her skin through the red silk searing his palm like a brand, and guided her toward the service exit. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. She knew the game. She knew that out there they were spectacle. In here, they were targets. They moved fast, a blur of black suits and red fabric, until they reached the VIP holding suite down the hall. Min-jun shoved the heavy mahogany door open, ushered her and the stroller inside, and slammed it shut. He locked it. Two of his most trusted lieutenants took positions outside. The silence in the room was sudden and violent. Min-jun turned, his composure fracturing. He looked at the stroller, then at her. 3 years, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You disappear. I scour the earth for you, and you walk into my engagement party with 3 children. Daughters, Amara corrected. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was steel wrapped in velvet. Their names are Mina, Hana, and Ari, and don't you dare raise your voice in front of them. Min-jun felt the air leave his lungs. He looked down. The 3 girls were staring at him, their earlier curiosity replaced by wariness. They looked so much like him it was physically painful. The same dark brows, the same stubborn mouths. Mine. The word scraped his throat. You know they are. He paced the small room, running a hand through his hair, destroying the perfect styling. How? I left you to keep you safe. I cut ties so the Kangs wouldn't touch you. I left you alone. You left me pregnant, she snapped. Min-jun froze. I didn't know, Amara said, her eyes glistening with a wet, hot anger. 2 weeks after you walked out of my apartment without a goodbye, the doctor told me. I thought about calling you. I picked up the phone 1,000 times. And then I saw the news. A car bombing in Incheon, a purge in your sector. I realized you didn't leave because you were bored. You left because you were at war. I was protecting you, he whispered, the excuse tasting like ash. So I protected them, she countered, gesturing to the girls. I moved to London. I changed my name. I raised them on a paralegal's salary in a studio apartment so small their cribs touched the stove. I did it so they would never know what a gunshot sounded like. Then why are you here? Min-jun stepped closer, looming over her. Why bring them back to the one place I tried to keep them from? Amara didn't back down. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a crumpled manila envelope. She slapped it against his chest. Because your protection expired. Min-jun opened the envelope. His fingers, usually steady enough to dismantle a weapon, trembled. Photographs slid out. They were grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Mina walking into her daycare in London, Hannah playing on a swing set, Ari holding Amara's hand at a crosswalk. They weren't just photos. They were crosshairs. On the back of the last photo, written in elegant old-fashioned Hangul, was a single line. A king should not forget his blood. Min-jun felt a coldness spread through his veins, distinct from the shock of fatherhood. This was the coldness of the predator. When did you get this? 3 days ago, Amara said. No return address, no demand for money, just the pictures. She stepped closer, her voice cracking, revealing the terrified mother beneath the warrior shell. I didn't come here to ruin your life, Min-jun. I came because someone found us. Someone watched my babies sleeping. I couldn't fight ghosts alone. Min-jun looked at the photos again. The angle of the shot outside the daycare, the specific dialect used in the note. It wasn't a rival syndicate. A rival would have kidnapped them for leverage instantly. This was psychological. This was a taunt. Who knows? Amara asked, watching his face change. Min-jun looked at the triplets. Hana had fallen asleep, her thumb in her mouth. She looked fragile, breakable, and she was sitting in the middle of a war zone he had helped build. Someone close, Min-jun said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Someone who knows I speak Hangul but you don't. Someone who knew exactly where to look. He looked up at the door, realizing with a sick, sinking dread that the person who threatened his children wasn't out on the street. They were likely in the ballroom drinking his champagne. Minjun's instinct was to smother the problem with the only tools he knew, money and walls. "I'll have a safe house prepped in Gangnam within the hour," he said, his voice rough with urgency. He reached for his phone. "I'll hire a private pediatric team. Nannies, security. You won't have to work another day. I will give them the life they deserve." He reached out, his hand hovering over the curls of the nearest triplet, Ari. He wanted to touch her, to verify she was real, to feel the connection that was screaming in his blood. Amara's hand shot out, intercepting his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Don't," she said. Her eyes were dry, burning with a resolve forged in cold London flats and lonely hospital waiting rooms. "You don't get to buy your way into this, Minjun. You don't get to disappear for 3 years and then reappear with a checkbook and act like you own them." "I am their father," he growled, though he didn't pull his wrist away. "Biologically, yes," Amara stepped into his space, forcing him back. "But where were you when Hannah had a fever of 104 and I didn't have a car to get her to the ER? Where were you when—" "I was working double shifts at a law firm just to pay for the formula they needed. I raised them, Minjun. I held them when they cried. I taught them to walk, me, alone." The words hit him like physical blows. He saw the shadow of the girl he used to love, but she was gone. In her place was a woman made of iron. "I didn't want your money then, and I don't want it now," she hissed. "I want them to survive. That note, it means someone wants to hurt them to get to you. I don't care about your empire. I care that my daughters are breathing." Minjun stared at her, a chaotic mix of shame and admiration warring in his chest. He had spent years building a kingdom of fear, but the bravest person he knew was standing right in front of him, unarmed, in a red dress. Before he could answer, the lock on the suite door clicked, the handle turned. The lieutenants outside didn't stop the intruder. They wouldn't dare. Lee Jiwoo stepped inside. The silence that followed was suffocating. If Amara was vivid, emotional, burning, Jiwoo was a glacier. She had composed herself in the hallway. Her face was a mask of porcelain perfection, her hands resting calmly on the swell of her pregnant belly. She didn't look at Minjun. She looked at the stroller. She walked forward slowly, the train of her black engagement gown rustling against the carpet. She stopped 3 feet from the triplets. She studied them with the clinical detachment of an accountant auditing a ledger. She looked at their eyes, Minjun's eyes, and then at the toddler clothes that were clean but clearly not designer. "Identical," Jiwoo said softly. It wasn't a compliment, it was an assessment. "Jiwoo," Minjun started, stepping between the two women. "This isn't what?" Jiwoo finally looked up, her gaze slicing through him. A surprise, clearly. A disaster. Potentially. She turned her eyes to Amara. There was no jealousy there, only calculation. "You are the ex-girlfriend. The American." "I'm the mother," Amara corrected, her stance shifting to block Jiwoo's view of the girls. Jiwoo's eyes flickered down to the stroller, then to her own stomach. Minjun could practically hear the gears turning in her head. The Lee family didn't deal in emotions. They dealt in leverage. 3 living heirs born before her own child were not just a scandal. In the intricate laws of syndicate succession, they were a threat. They were obstacles. Or, if used correctly, they were pawns. "My father is outside," Jiwoo said, her voice devoid of inflection. "He is asking questions. The guests are asking questions. The stock price of your holding company is already reacting to the rumors." "I don't care about the stock price," Minjun snapped. "You should," Jiwoo countered smoothly, "because without it you don't have the power to protect them." She gestured vaguely at the triplets. "Or me, or the child I am carrying." She trapped him. With 2 sentences she reminded him of the noose around his neck. He was engaged to her. His alliance with the Lees kept his enemies at bay. If he blew this up, if he chose Amara publicly right now, he would lose the shield that kept them all alive. Minjun looked from Amara, vibrating with protective fury, to Jiwoo, cold and immovable. One represented the only real thing he had ever felt, the other represented the empire he needed to survive. Jiwoo smoothed the fabric of her dress. She walked to the door, placing her hand on the handle. She didn't look back as she spoke. Get her out of the hotel, Minjun. Hide them. But don't think this is over. She paused, her knuckles white against the brass. Come to my father's study in 20 minutes. We need to have a private discussion about the future of this family. And you better have a solution that doesn't involve me becoming a laughingstock. The private study of the Leaf family patriarch was soundproofed, lined with books that had never been read and scotch that cost more than most people earned in a year, but the air inside tasted like copper. Jiwoo sat on a velvet sofa, her posture impeccable. She didn't look like a woman who had just been humiliated. She looked like a CEO negotiating a hostile takeover. Here are the terms, she said, sliding a porcelain teacup onto the table. There was no tremor in her hand. You go back out there. You take the microphone. You announce that the woman is a deranged stalker from your past. You claim the children are not yours. You demand security remove them. Minjun stood by the window, watching the city lights of Seoul, a city he thought he ruled until 10 minutes ago. And if I don't? Then the merger is dead, Jiwoo said simply. My father pulls his capital. The politicians in his pocket will turn on you. The Incheon syndicate will smell blood and attack your ports by morning. You will be at war, Minjun, alone. They are my daughters, Jiwoo. They are liabilities. Her voice finally snapped, sharp as a whip. She stood up, smoothing her hands over her pregnant belly. I am carrying your heir. This child is the future of the syndicate, those 3 girls. They are complications. She walked closer, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Did you really think we didn't know? My father's intelligence network picked up chatter about foreign children in London 6 months ago. We didn't say anything because we assumed you were smart enough to keep them buried. Minjun turned slowly. The predator in him woke up, hackles raised. You knew. We suspect, she corrected. The plan was to let the wedding proceed, and afterwards, my father intended to have the problem solved quietly. A relocation, an accident. It didn't matter. The room seemed to tilt. Minjun looked at the woman he had agreed to marry. He realized then that the greatest threat to his daughters wasn't the mysterious photographer or the rival gangs. It was the people standing right next to him at the altar. You were going to kill them, Minjun said. It wasn't a question. We were going to protect the legacy, Jiwoo replied, her eyes cold and unapologetic. Make your choice, Minjun. The empire or the distraction. Down the hall, inside the locked VIP suite, Amara wasn't waiting for a rescue. She was packing. She moved with frantic efficiency, shoving diapers and formula back into the diaper bag. She checked the window, locked, 3 stories up. No exit there. She checked the stroller's wheels. Mama, Mina whimpered, picking up on the tension. It's okay, baby, Amara whispered, though her hands were shaking. She had seen the way the security guards looked at her, not as guests but as problems. She knew that look. It was the look men gave things they were about to dispose of. She wasn't going to let Minjun play happy family while his world sharpened its knives. If that door opened and it wasn't him, she was ready to fight her way out. Minjun walked out of the study and straight into the waiting area where his inner council stood. His lieutenants, men who had bled with him, killed for him, looked uneasy. They had heard the rumors. They saw the Leaf family guards hand-checking their weapons, preparing for violence. Boss, his second-in-command Choi, stepped forward. Chairman Lee is demanding we escort the woman off the premises. He says she's a security risk. She stays, Minjun said. Choi blinked. Sir, with respect, the Alliance, if we insult the Lees now. I said she stays. Minjun's voice cracked through the hallway like a gunshot. The chatter died instantly. He stepped into the center of the circle, his eyes wild but his mind aggressively clear. He saw the hesitation in his men. Some were looking at the door to the Lee study, weighing their odds. They were wondering if the King of Seoul was losing his mind over a pretty face from the past. Choi, Minjun ordered, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. Pull the perimeter guard. I want 6 men on all. Amara's door. Only men we vetted before the merger. If anyone from the Lee family tries to enter that room, anyone, you put a bullet in their knee." "Sir," Choi hesitated. "That's a declaration of war." "The war already started," Minjun said, adjusting his cuffs. "We just didn't know we were fighting it." He looked around the circle. He saw loyalty in some eyes and calculation in others. The fracture had begun. The syndicate was no longer a monolith. It was dividing right there in the hallway between those who served the Empire and those who would serve the Father. Minjun turned his back on the doubts and walked toward the suite where his daughters were waiting. He had made his choice. Now he just had to survive it. The VIP suite had become a fortress, but inside, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Minjun stood by the door, his hand instinctively resting on the pistol holstered beneath his jacket. "Take it off," Amara said. She wasn't asking. Minjun blinked, looking at her. "We are surrounded by enemies, Amara. And you are in a room with 3 toddlers who grab everything they see," she countered, crossing her arms. "If you want to be in here, the weapon stays out there. You don't get to bring your war into their playpen. You want to be a father. Start by not being a soldier for 5 minutes." It was a test. Minjun knew it. He hesitated, feeling the weight of the gun, his security blanket for a decade, and then slowly unholstered it. He opened the door crack, handing the weapon to Choi outside, and locked the deadbolt again. When he turned back, Amara's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to the expensive Persian rug. "You're too tall. You're scaring them." The King of Seoul's underworld, a man who made CEOs tremble, unbuttoned his tailored blazer and sat cross-legged on the floor. "Mina, Hana, Ari." Amara pointed to each girl in turn. Minjun repeated the names, tasting the syllables. They weren't just names, they were spells breaking a curse he hadn't realized he was under. Mina was the first to move. She was the one who had stared him down in the ballroom. She marched up to him, grabbed his silk tie, and inspected it with critical suspicion. "Mina is the boss," Amara said, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. "She's fearless. She walks first, eats first, fights first." "She has your chin," Minjun murmured, terrified to move as the tiny girl tugged on his expensive suit. "And your temper," Amara shot back. She nodded to the girl sitting quietly near the stroller, stacking coasters with intense focus. "That's Hana. She watches everything. She doesn't speak much, but she knows exactly where I hide the cookies. She's the thinker." Minjun watched Hana. She looked up, her dark eyes scanning him, dissecting him, before returning to her tower. Calculated, he thought. Like me. Then there was Ari. The third girl didn't inspect or calculate. She simply squealed, stumbled across the rug, and threw herself against Minjun's chest, burying her face in his shirt. She smelled like baby powder and innocence. "Ari," Amara whispered, her voice softening. "She loves everyone. She's the only one who sleeps through the night." Minjun froze as Ari's small hand patted his cheek. A warmth exploded in his chest, hot and terrifying. He had spent years feeling cold, surrounding himself with metal and concrete and cold-blooded men. He had forgotten what human warmth felt like. He wrapped a tentative arm around Ari, his large hand spanning her entire back. For 20 minutes, the war outside ceased to exist. Minjun learned that Mina liked to chew on fists, Hana liked order, and Ari liked hugs. He learned that his empire meant nothing compared to the way Ari laughed when he covered his face with his hands. He was experiencing a dangerous emotion. Peace. 3 floors down, on a private balcony overlooking the hotel gardens, Lee Jiwoo watched. The windows of the VIP suite, she couldn't see inside, but she could see the change in the guard rotation. She saw Minjun's top lieutenants stationed there, backs to the world, guns drawn. She took a sip of her tea, the porcelain rattling slightly against the saucer. It wasn't sadness she felt, it was the icy sting of obsolescence. She had offered him a dynasty. She had offered him the Lee family crest. And he had barricaded himself in a room with a woman who wore a cheap dress and 3 illegitimate children. She wasn't just losing a fiancé, she was losing her leverage, and in her world, when you lost leverage, you became a target. He chose them, she whispered to the empty air. Fear coiled in her stomach, not for him, but for herself. Her father would not accept this insult. If Minjun wouldn't be the son-in-law they purchased, he would be the enemy they destroyed. Back in the suite, the bubble popped. Minjun was holding Hana's stack of coasters, his guard completely down. When his phone buzzed against the floorboards, the vibration was harsh, intrusive. He picked it up. A message from Choi. Hostile movement detected. South elevator, not the Lees. Minjun's face changed instantly. The father vanished. The enforcer returned. His eyes went hard, his posture rigid. Amara saw the shift. She scooped Ari out of his lap before he even spoke. What is it? We're leaving, Minjun said, standing up. Someone else is here. He looked at the girls. Mina still chewing on his tie, Hana watching him, Ari reaching for him, and a new violent vow forged itself in his heart. He had spent his life fighting for power, but looking at them he realized he had been fighting for dust. This was the only thing that mattered, and God help anyone who tried to touch them. He just put down his gun to hold his daughter. Now the enemy is at the door. If you're not subscribed yet, you're letting him face this massacre alone. Hit the button. Don't let a father fight an entire army without backup. Stand your ground with him. Minjun tapped the screen. The grainy black and white feed from the hallway camera stuttered to life. It was a massacre in silence. On the small screen, men dressed in hotel staff uniforms were moving with synchronized lethality. Minjun watched as 2 of his vetted guards were dropped, tased, and dragged into a service closet before they could even radio for backup. These weren't the clumsy thugs of a rival street gang. These were professionals. The Lees, Minjun said, the name tasting like bile. They aren't waiting for the party to end. They're coming in, Amara asked, her voice tight. She was already moving, scooping Ari into the carrier and motioning for Mina and Hana to get behind the heavy oak desk. They're coming to clean up the mess, Minjun corrected. He checked his phone again. A second alert flashed red. Perimeter breach. West Wing. It's not just them, he realized, his blood running cold. The rival. Faction. The ones who sent the photos. They used the chaos of the engagement to slip in. They're squeezing us from both sides. The Lees want the girls gone to save the merger. The rivals want them to destroy me. He reached for the pistol he had surrendered earlier. The transformation was instantaneous. The father who had been playing on the rug vanished. The butcher of soul returned. His eyes went dead. His muscles coiled. He looked ready to open the door and paint the hallway red regardless of the cost. Stay down, he ordered, racking the slide. I'll kill them all. No. Amara stepped in front of the door, blocking his path. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at him. Move, Amara. Look at you, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at his chest. You're ready to burn this whole hotel down, and what happens when the smoke clears? Do my daughters grow up visiting you in prison? Do they grow up with a target on their backs because their father started a massacre on their second birthday? I am trying to save you, Minjun roared, though he kept his voice low enough not to startle the children huddled behind the desk. Then do it differently. Amara grabbed his lapels, forcing him to look at her. This is your world, Minjun. You built it. Prove to me that you can navigate it without destroying us in the process. Prove you're a king, not just a killer. Minjun froze. He looked past her at the 3 pairs of terrified eyes peeking out from behind the mahogany desk. If he started shooting now, the trauma would be their first real memory of him. Love is a vulnerability, he realized. But it is also the only reason to survive. He lowered the gun. He adjusted his jacket. He didn't look like a thug anymore. He looked like a CEO walking into a boardroom to fire everyone. Lock the door behind me, he said softly. Don't open it for anyone but me. He stepped out into the hallway. The 3 men in waiter uniforms froze. They were 5 feet from the hut. Door suppressors already screwed onto their weapons. Standing behind them, safely out of the line of fire, was the Lee family's head of security, and Ji Woo. She was still holding her stomach, her face pale but her eyes dry. Stop, Minjun said. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply spoke with the absolute authority of a man who owned the building. The men hesitated. They looked at Ji-woo. It's over, Min-jun, Ji-woo said, her voice hollow. My father gave the order. We remove the problem. We issue a press release saying you were shaken down by a mentally unstable woman. The wedding proceeds in an hour. There is no wedding, Min-jun said, walking steadily toward the gunmen, and there is no merger. Don't be stupid, Ji-woo snapped, her composure cracking. You need us. The rivals are in the lobby. Without the Leaf family's protection, you are dead before midnight. Give us the girls. We will relocate them. You can survive this. Min-jun stopped 2 feet from the barrel of the lead assassin's gun. He looked at Ji-woo, really looked at her. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the cold calculation. She was willing to let 3 children vanish to secure her child's inheritance. I thought I needed your family to be strong, Min-jun said quietly. But I realized something, Ji-woo. You trade in fear, I trade in loyalty. He looked at the assassins. You work for the Lees, but who runs the streets you live on? Who pays the pensions for your families? The lead gunman's grip wavered. If you pull that trigger, Min-jun continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, you start a war with the only syndicate that actually matters in this city. And I promise you, by morning, there won't be a Lee family left to pay you. The hallway was silent. The elevator chimed in the distance. The rivals were getting closer. Ji-woo stared at him, tears finally spilling over. She knew she had lost. Not just the argument, but him. You're making a mistake, she whispered. My father will burn you for this. Let him try, Min-jun said. He turned his back on the guns, a move of supreme arrogance and trust, and looked at Ji-woo. Tell your father the alliance is dead. And tell him if his men take one more step toward that door, I will return his ring attached to his finger. Ji-woo flinched. She signaled her men. Let the rivals have him, she said coldly, turning on her heel. If he wants to die for them, let him. The Lee faction retreated down the hall, leaving Min-jun alone in the corridor. The elevator doors pinged open at the far end of the wing. The war had begun, and the first shot hadn't even been fired. Min-jun locked the suite door, the heavy deadbolt sliding home with the sound of finality. He didn't move away from it. He stood with his back against the wood, breathing hard, the adrenaline of the hallway confrontation fading into a dull, aching exhaustion. Amara was still behind the desk, her body shielded, over the girls. When she saw it was him, and only him, she slowly straightened. They're gone? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Lees are gone, Min-jun said, pushing off the door and walking into the room. He felt heavier, as if he were dragging the weight of his entire history behind him. But the wolves are still in the lobby. He stopped in the center of the room. The triplets were quiet, sensing the gravity in the air. Ari was clutching a stuffed bear, watching him with wide eyes. Why? Amara asked. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a plea. 3 years, Min-jun. You have to tell me, if we die tonight, I need to know why you threw us away. Min-jun looked at her, and the mask finally shattered. I didn't throw you away, he said, his voice cracking. I cut myself out of you. There's a difference. He walked to the window, staring out at the city lights that offered no comfort. 3 years ago, the night before I left, there was a bomb under my car. Didn't tell you, my driver started the engine and incinerated instantly. Amara gasped softly. I got a message 10 minutes later, Min-jun continued, turning to face her. It listed your address, your work schedule, the route you took to the grocery store. It said, the next one won't be under a car. It will be under her bed. He stepped closer, his hands open, pleading. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, Amara. I left because my father taught me that love is a target. He taught me that the only way to keep something safe is to have nothing to do with it. I thought if I made you hate me, they would believe you didn't matter. I thought distance was safety. Amara stared at him, tears finally spilling over her lashes. She saw the torture in his eyes. She saw the boy who had been raised by wolves trying to figure out how to be human. You decided for me, she said, her voice trembling. You took away my choice. I took away the target, he insisted. I would have burned the world to keep you safe. I just didn't know. I didn't know I was leaving you with them. He looked at the girls. If I had known you were pregnant, I would have killed every man in this city before I let you go. Amara closed the distance between them. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss him. She placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. You're not that boy anymore, Minjun, she said firmly. And you're not your father. Your father used fear. He used people. Look at where that got him. It kept him alive, Minjun countered. It got him a grave, she corrected, and it left you alone. She took a deep breath, wiping her tears. The steel was back in her spine. I love you. I hate that I do, but love isn't enough to save us right now. I need a father for them, not a warlord. I can be both, he said. No, Amara shook her head. You have to choose. If you go out there and slaughter everyone to protect us, you become the monster they say you are. And one day, that monster will turn on us too. So here is the deal. She stepped back, standing between him and the triplets. Protect us, she said, but do it without becoming him. Do it like a man who has something to live for, not something to kill for. If you can't do that, then let us go. Minjun looked at her, then at the girls. Mina was watching him, judging him. A king should not forget his blood. The intercom on the wall buzzed harsh and loud. Sir, Choi's voice crackled through, sounding frantic. The MC is stalling. The guests are getting restless. The rivals have moved into the ballroom. They're waiting for the announcement. If you don't show your face in 2 minutes, they're going to assume you've fled. Minjun pressed the button. I'm coming. He adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. He looked at Amara one last time. Lock the door, he said. I'm going to end this. He walked out of the suite, leaving the safety of the room for the chaotic glitter of the ballroom. Downstairs, 500 people were waiting for an engagement toast. They were expecting a merger. They were expecting peace. They had no idea that the King of Seoul was coming down to burn the whole script. The ballroom was louder than he remembered, a cacophony of nervous laughter and clinking crystal. But when Minjun stepped onto the raised dais, the noise died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. 500 pairs of eyes locked onto him. To the uninitiated, he looked like the perfect groom. Tuxedo sharp, hair perfectly swept, expression unreadable. But the people who mattered, the mob bosses in the back, the corrupt senators near the bar, and the Lee family in the front row, saw something else. They saw a man walking to the gallows. Minjun took the microphone from the trembling MC. The feedback whined, a high-pitched scream that made the guests flinch. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. He looked at the front table. Chairman Lee sat there, swirling his scotch, looking smug. Beside him sat Ji-woo. She wasn't looking at Minjun. She was staring at the tablecloth, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She knew what was coming. She was the only one who did. Minjun shifted his gaze to the back of the room. Shadowy figures stood near the exits, men from the rival cartel who had sent the photos. They were waiting for him to kneel. They were waiting for him to announce the merger that would make him a puppet. He thought of the 3 little girls upstairs. Mina's fierce glare, Hana's quiet observation, Ari's warm weight against his chest. He thought of Amara, standing between him and a gun, demanding he be better. Do it without becoming him. Minjun's grip tightened on the microphone stand. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of a union, Minjun began, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. It was deep, steady, and utterly devoid of warmth. A merger of families, a consolidation of power. Chairman Lee nodded, raising his glass slightly. But a king, Minjun continued, his eyes locking directly onto the chairman, is nothing if he cannot protect his own blood. The chairman's glass stopped in mid-air. Minjun looked out at the sea of faces, the elite of Seoul who thought they were untouchable. Earlier tonight, a woman entered this room. Many of you whispered. Many of you laughed. Minjun's voice dropped an octave, turning into a low, terrifying growl. Let me be clear, so there are no rumors tomorrow. The children she carried are not mistakes. They are not secrets. He took a breath, and for the first time in his life, he let the truth become his weapon. Their names are Mina, Hannah, and Ari. They are my daughters. A collective gasp ripped through the room. A wine glass shattered somewhere near the back. They are Kang's, Minjun declared, his voice rising over the murmurs, and from this moment on they are under my personal protection. If anyone looks at them wrong, whispers their names, or steps within a mile of them. He paused, letting the threat hang heavy and suffocating in the air. You answer to me. He stepped off the dais and walked toward the Lee family table. The room parted for him like the Red Sea, guests shrinking back from the radioactive intensity of his presence. He stopped in front of Jiwoo. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the platinum engagement band she had returned to him in private earlier. Or rather, the matching band he was meant to wear. He placed it gently on the table next to her untouched champagne. I cannot marry you, Jiwoo, he said, loud enough for the table to hear. I cannot build an empire on a lie. Jiwoo didn't look up. But her father did. Chairman Lee stood up, his face a mask of purple fury. He didn't scream. He didn't make a scene. He simply looked at Minjun and made a cutting motion across his throat. You are dead, boy, the chairman whispered. You and your bastards. Try it, Minjun replied. That was the spark. The room erupted. It wasn't a riot yet, but panic was spreading like wildfire. Civilians scrambled for the exits, sensing the violence radiating from the men in suits. At the back of the room, the rival syndicate members drew their weapons, seeing the alliance crumble in real time. Security guards shouted into their earpieces. Minjun didn't run. He turned his back on the furious chairman and the screaming guests and walked toward the service elevator. The world he had built was burning down around him. He had lost his army, his funding, and his future. But as he loosened his tie and hit the button for the penthouse floor, Minjun smiled. The war was here, and for the first time, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 30 seconds. In that time, Minjun's empire dismantled itself. His phone didn't stop vibrating. It wasn't calls, it was automated alerts. Offshore accounts, frozen, logistics hub, raided, port authority, contract terminated. The Lee family worked fast. They weren't just breaking the engagement, they were stripping the meat from his bones. By the time the doors pinged open, Minjun was technically bankrupt. He didn't care. He stepped into the hallway and walked straight into a firefight. The rival faction, the shadows who had sent the photos, had breached the stairwell. 3 men were advancing on the VIP suite, suppressed pistols spitting quiet death. Minjun's loyal guards were pinned down behind a luggage cart. Minjun didn't hesitate. He pulled his weapon, the movement fluid and practiced, and put 2 rounds into the nearest attacker. Choi, he roared, advancing while firing. Get the car to the north exit, now. He reached the door of the suite just as the lock splintered from a kick. A rival mercenary was already inside. Minjun lunged, tackling the man into the foyer. They crashed into a side table, a vase shattering. The mercenary raised his gun, but before Minjun could break his wrist, a heavy ceramic lamp smashed over the attacker's head. The man crumbled. Amara stood over him, breathing hard, the broken base of the lamp in her hand. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't cowering. She had pushed the stroller into the bathroom for cover and stood her ground in the foyer. You're late, she said, dropping the lamp. Traffic was bad, Minjun grunted, hauling her up. Grab the girls. We're leaving. The lobby is a kill box, Amara warned, rushing to the bathroom where the triplets were huddled in the bathtub, surprisingly quiet, sensing the danger. We're not going out the lobby. Minjun grabbed the stroller, collapsing it with one hand while hoisting Ari onto his hip. Amara grabbed Mina and Hannah. They moved like a unit, synchronized by necessity. In the hallway, the firefight had turned desperate. One of Minjun's guards turned, aiming his weapon not at the rivals, but toward Minjun, the traitor, the inside man who had leaked the daycare photos. Minjun saw the shift in the guard's eyes. Bang. Minjun didn't blink. The traitor dropped. A hole in his chest. Minjun stepped over the body, shielding Ari's head from the sight. Move, he commanded. They sprinted for the service elevator. Behind them, the hotel fire alarm finally triggered, piercing, rhythmic shrieks that added to the chaos. Smoke began to fill the corridor. Someone had set a fire in the stairwell to cover the retreat. They burst into the underground garage just as Choi skidded the armored SUV to a halt. The doors flew open. "Get them in, go, go, go." Minjun shoved Amara and the girls into the back seat, using his own body as a shield as bullets sparked against the concrete pillars. He dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door. "Drive." The SUV roared, tires smoking as it tore toward the exit ramp. They smashed through the wooden parking barrier, glass and wood exploding over the hood, and shot out onto the streets of Seoul. Sirens wailed in the distance, a chorus of blue and red lights converging on the hotel they had just fled. Minjun watched in the side mirror. Smoke was billowing from the third floor of the five-star hotel. The venue of his engagement, the symbol of his ascension to the elite, was burning. Silence settled inside the armored car. Minjun turned around. In the back seat, Amara was trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. She was clutching all three girls, checking them for scratches, kissing their foreheads frantically. Mina stared back at Minjun, eyes wide. "You okay?" Minjun asked. His voice hoarse. Amara looked up. She didn't smile, but she nodded. She reached out her hand, finding his over the center console. She squeezed. Minjun looked forward again, watching the city blur past. He checked his phone one last time. 0 balance. 0 allies. The Lee family had marked him for death. The rival syndicates knew where he lived. Every predator in Seoul was currently sharpening their claws, knowing the king had exposed his throat. He had lost his crown. He had lost his safety. He had started a war that would likely last for years. But as he listened to the soft, rhythmic breathing of his daughters in the back seat, Minjun felt a strange, terrifying exhilaration. He had burned his empire to the ground, but for the first time in his life, he was holding the only thing worth ruling. "Where to, boss?" Choi asked, eyeing the rearview mirror nervously. Minjun looked at the road ahead, into the dark, uncertain future. "Somewhere they can't find us," Minjun said. "War is coming, Choi. Let's make sure we're ready to win it." He burned his entire empire just to save them. The very least you can do is hit subscribe. Don't you dare abandon them on the side of the road now that the real war is starting. Turn on notifications and stay in the convoy.